Welcome to the RSTNE Roundtable podcast, a discussion that focuses in the gold standard of the Word of Yahuwah. Here are your three hosts, Sholiach Moshe, leader Yoshiyahu, and leader Mordecai.
Shalom, shalom, everybody. Nice to have you with us. This is episode 3 of the RSTNE Roundtable. I'm here with my peeps. We have the Mordecai, the older, and Yoshi, the younger. Your friends, my friends, and my panel on our round table. Even if it's a square table, it'll still work. So today, I'm going to have to apologize ahead of time. Today's topic, at least when we get started, things might heat up later on, but at least when we get started, it's going to be very boring because it's going to deal with history. It's going to deal with errors of the church and their church fathers and the translators. So it's going to be boring. I'm just going to keep it real, dude. It's going to get boring, but it should heat up once we get into the friction of what these instruments of the enemy have done to us, have done to all of us. They victimize us because we want to know the truth and we want to press in to know the truth, the full revelation within the Hebraic context. So they literally have done us, the Jeremiah 8:8 scribes have literally done us a disservice. And it's not just the Pharisees who are the original, or some of the original redactors. It's also some of the modern English translators, the ones that are held as saints in the highest esteem. So we're going to begin with some facts, and I'm going to ask my panel if they have any questions, they can jump in. The history of the English scriptures that has affected every single one of our translations. In other words, there's not a single English translation that has not been affected by Greek, Greco-Roman, pagan viruses. These guys appear to be saints. Some of them were burned at the stake. Some of them were murdered by the Catholic Church. Some of them were excommunicated from the Anglican Church. And so we look at them as heroes. Many of them try to do their best, but the end result was the Greco-Romaning and paganization of all translations. So we have our work cut out for us. At the Restoration Scriptures True Name Edition, the work is never over because we literally are encountering hundreds and hundreds of places where it looks benign, but it's actually malignant. Okay, it looks, there's no error here. And even if we put in the name of Yahuwah, which we know has been removed over 7,000 times, plus 9,000 if you include the Berkah, that's not going to fix it. That's not going to. We have a job that'll never be done. I believe only Yahushua is going to fix this because that's how deep these wounds and that's how deep these errors have come upon us. And that's why it's going to be boring in the beginning. But I mean, our panel, we can chip in and whatever you want to share, you guys go ahead. But let me set the table. Okay, so like the first 10, 15 minutes, let me set the table. And then when we start rolling, feel free to contribute and feel free to ask questions. So the history of the English Bible, there were basically 3 guys who are responsible for bringing the gift of the scriptures into English. First, we have Wycliffe, followed by Tyndale, followed by Cloverdale, followed by King James and Bloody Mary, his murderous wife. This is a chain of Greek, pagan culture, anti-Semitic, anti-Torah, anti-Nomi, anti-Judah, anti-Ephraim, anti-two-house agendas, biases, and theology that have given us the translations that more than likely are the ones you use because you're scared and you've been frightened to use anything else, like we talked about in last week's podcast. This is episode 3 of the RSTNE Roundtable. Welcome, everyone, and welcome all. I think I may put this on the screen so that our panel can see it and maybe make it a little bit easier to follow along, and also for the rest of you as well. Okay, I'll make things just a tad easier. Some of this is out of order, but the facts are not, and what's really out of order is their misdeeds. The true history of the English scriptures regarding John Wycliffe, Tyndale, Cloverdale, and King James himself. Their lack of understanding Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek is astounding, at least enough to put together a good translation. We find that all of them, and we try to talk a little bit more about this later, used the German translation by Martin Luther, as well as the Latin Vulgate, to form the basis of English scriptures, meaning they are non-Hebrew and Aramaic based. They are Latin and Greek based. We also discuss how King James in the Geneva Bible was a convention of deacons, and then the king who relied solely on Tyndale and Cloverdale's errors, their biases, and their antinomian attitude. So here we have the basic history of the English Bible scriptures. Wycliffe, Tyndale, Cloverdale, and King James. John Wycliffe made his own translation. Some of his followers, called the Lollards, helped copy it. There were relatively few copies made because the movable type printing press had not been invented and all copies had to be made by hand. Tyndale, who followed up on the work that John Wycliffe, by the way, John Wycliffe never translated the scriptures. He never finished. Okay? He tried to use the portions of the Hebrew in the Tanakh, but even that he never finished. None of these guys ever attempted to use the Hebrew and the Aramaic manuscripts for the New Testament because they didn't have them, they didn't want them, and they didn't even believe that it existed. Let me say that again. They didn't have them, which means right away their translation is to be questioned. They didn't have them, they didn't want them, and even if they hadn't and wanted them, they doubtful they would have used them. So we'll talk a little bit more about this. Let's see if we can jump down a little bit here, because otherwise we're going to be jumping back and forth. Wycliffe, let's get back to Wycliffe, 1330 to 1384. His followers, academics from Oxford, translated into English from the Vulgate, see there it is, from Jerome's Latin Vulgate around 1384. Motivated by concerns regarding the lack of biblical support and around the supremacy of the papacy and the doctrine of the Last Supper, Wycliffe sought to translate the Bible into Middle English, which, by the way, nobody speaks today. So even if he did a perfect translation from the Hebrew and the Aramaic, which he had no desire to do, neither did he have the manuscripts to do, we would all be speaking Middle English, which means we wouldn't be speaking English at all. Okay? 3 languages were prevalent in England. Latin was used by clerics and academics, French by the aristocracy, and English by the peasants. Wycliffe his aim was to bring the scriptures to common man, the farmers. Wycliffe translated a large segment, though historians cannot confirm with certainty exactly what he did and he did not. Let me say that again. Not only he used the Latin and the German as his primary sources, he did use the Hebrew, but whatever he did, nobody can agree upon what he did because it was never finished. Okay? Regardless, it is clear that the translation took place under his leadership. Now, to follow up on the work of Wycliffe, we have Tyndale. Tyndale only translated the first half of the Old Testament from the Hebrew. In other words, they didn't have Hebrew for the Brit Chadashah, so the Brit Chadashah is full of mistakes and Greco-Roman paganism, and I'll show you a few during our panel discussion when we can start, getting some friction and putting some tread down on the ground here. So even Tyndale, so nobody knows how much Wycliffe finished, and even if he did finish a big part of the scriptures, it came from Latin, German, and wound up in Middle English, which today it would make your head spin to try to spell and understand Middle English. Then Tyndale only translated half of the Tanakh from Hebrew, which means the rest was translated by a guy named Rogers and Miles Cloverdale. So that's why I'm showing you this is a chain of how we got the English scripture. But even Cloverdale had limited expertise in the Hebrew. He didn't do the entire Tanakh, forget the Brit Chadashah, meaning that his expertise needed help. He was not an expert, okay? So whatever they did, they were not experts. They were intermediate speakers, number two. They needed help. And help came in the form of the Geneva Bible, which was a bunch of deacons, Anglican deacons, who were basically an offshoot of the Catholic Church, and then later by King James. Could you imagine King James and a bunch of deacons who had left the Roman Catholic Church fixing what Tyndale and Wycliffe started? So let's go back now and see who these guys were. Wycliffe was a Roman Catholic. Made no attempt to find any kind of Hebrew basis for the Brit Chadashah, the renewed covenant, and even never finished the work. Tyndale also didn't finish the work. And guess what? He was also a Católico. He was a priest who became convinced that the Bible had to be translated so the farmers could read the scriptures while they farmed. He stated he desired the farmers to read, okay? At that time, he didn't, not to keep Torah, not to keep Shabbat, not to keep the Moedim. He wanted the farmers to be able to read a few verses. And nobody knows what either of these guys finished. So Miles Cloverdale had to come and allegedly finish that. And then the former Catholics, now Anglicans, ran to Geneva, where the Protestants had the freedom to publish the scriptures. So they were hiding in Geneva because they were free. It was a free society, but they gave us the same garbage, okay? Antinomian, anti-Hebrew, very pro-polytheistic, very pro-Apollos and Jupiter and Venus. Oh yeah, they were very in favor of all these gods. And I'll show you that in a few places. At that time, but they didn't want to know Yahuwah's name. Oh, Yah forbid that they should restore his name. Now, at that time, the only available translation was Latin, a language spoken by priests and scholars. So these were guys who were Latin speakers. To what degree Tyndale was inspired by Wycliffe is not known because they were separated by 200 years. So Tyndale, who came after Wycliffe from the 1300s later, 200 years later, first he had the movable printing press, so he had an advantage, and it was cheaper and more rapid to distribute his works. The other greater advantage was a complete, and check this out, of the Roman Catholic Erasmus compilation of Greek manuscripts. That was an advantage. So what made Tyndale more effective than Wycliffe, he had more Roman crap, he had more Greek crap, he had more lies to work with. This is every scriptures that you guys have, all right? We're not talking about the King James Bible. No. Every version that you have, and you're not open to the Restoration Scriptures True Name Edition, then I am telling you, you are continuing in the tradition of popery. Even though you think you have a Protestant Bible, you are continuing in the awful tradition of popery. You basically have a Catholic Bible and you don't know it. How does that make you feel? How does that make you feel? Doesn't make me feel good. Is there enough truth in there to come to Jesus? Yep. So you had your come to Jesus moment. But there's not enough truth in there for you to be discipled and prepare for the kingdom and prepare to live in the Father's house. There's not enough in there to disciple you. There's enough in there to mislead you and put you off the straight and narrow path. But there's enough to bring you to Jesus. You had your come to Jesus moment. So yes, it worked. It did work because we didn't speak Latin and we didn't speak Greek. So yeah, I guess we met Yahusha through this stuff. But now do we stay in our diapers and our caca, or do we take our diapers off and throw them to the side? This enabled Tyndale to translate from the original language, the Greek, rather than making a new translation of a translation. This would always ensure more accurate information. Tyndale, who followed up 200 years later, from the 1300s to 1522 to 1535, he translated into early modern English. Okay, there's the advance. You went from Middle English to early modern English. Not modern, but early modern. Tyndale's text is credited with being the first Anglophone biblical translation to work directly from the Hebrew and Greek texts. Now watch this. Although it relied most of the time or very heavily on the Latin and the German. All y'all got is a Catholic Bible. That's what y'all got. And you paid $99 for the leather edition of your Catholic Bible, thinking that it was a Reformed Bible, that it was a Reformed Protestant babble. Okay? So even the great Bill Tyndale, okay, relied heavily. He checked out the Hebrew and the Greek, but most of his translation was of a translation. Even if he had the original Hebrew and Greek, which he didn't, because there are 5,800 Greek manuscripts. No two Greek manuscripts agree with each other, by the way. You have 380 Aramaic Peshitta manuscripts, and everyone agrees with everyone else. There are no differences between the 380 Aramaic Syriac manuscripts that we have. There's no differences. But in the Greek, 5,800 manuscripts, no two match. Okay? But he did, to his credit, he did consult the Hebrew and the German, but chose not to use it. He chose mostly to use the Latin and the German, a tradition built on lies. No Hebrew for the New Testament and almost no Hebrew for the Tanakh, and even his knowledge was like, Boker Tov, Yom Tov, a few words, like some of you. You probably knew as much Hebrew as Tyndale did. Maybe he knew a little bit more. Maybe. It's possible. But are you in a position to translate word for word from any Hebrew manuscript? Forget about the Masoretes and all the changes they made. This is why it's a blessing to have the Dead Sea Scrolls 900 years older than the Masoretic. That's why it's a blessing to have the Septuagint, which was derived from a Hebrew, which is 200 BC, which goes back to an earlier tradition. So we should be translating from those, okay? The chain of events that led to the creation of Tyndale's New Testament in 1522, when Tyndale acquired a copy of Luther's German New Testament. And by the way, lest we forget, Martin Luther lived and died as a Roman Catholic priest. Yes, he was a reformer in sola scriptura and faith alone, scripture alone, but he never really stopped being a Roman Catholic priest, even though they threw him out. Tyndale began a translation into English referencing a Greek text compiled by Erasmus from several manuscripts. So he didn't bother trying to get the Greek of the Septuagint. Oh, no. So none of the translations from the Greek use the Septuagint. No. That was a separate tradition. The Greek that you have in the King James, the NIV, the New American Standard, blah, blah, blah. Who knows if it's a Greek text? Why? Because it was compiled by the emissary of the Pope. Erasmus, from his texts, thought to predate the Latin Vulgate. They were called Latin Gospel translations from Jerome. So check this out. So Tyndale and Wycliffe, more Tyndale, claim to have gone into the original Greek and the original Hebrew. Problem is, that's a lie. They used the German and the Latin, and they didn't really go into the original Greek, even though nobody knows what the original Greek is. There's 5,800 manuscripts. We know what the original Aramaic was because all the 380 manuscripts match, okay? So he used the Greek, but it wasn't the original Greek or the Greek of the Septuagint. It was a Greek from Jerome's Latin Vulgate, translated from Latin into Greek by Erasmus, and then from Greek into Middle English by Tyndale. But remember, it wasn't the entire Old Testament. It was just pieces. So which pieces are from the Latin? Which pieces are German? Which pieces of our perfect Mount Sinai given English Bibles today are based on Erasmus's Latin or Greek translation of the Latin? In other words, it's a translation of a translation of a translation. By who? By Roman Catholics, papists, who never renounced popery. They just renounced certain aspects of popery, like indulgences and like purgatory, and like the laity not being able to read scripture. They renounced certain aspects of popery, but without ever fully giving up popery themselves. When translating the New Testament, this talking about Mr. Tyndale, who's a legend, by the way. Oh, in the Southern Baptists and the Baptists and the Independent Baptists and Calvary Chapel. Oh, these are legends. These are like Mother Teresa. These are Protestant Mother Teresas. These are like saints in the Protestant pantheon of heroes. Not a single one of them were even interested if they can find a Hebrew copy of the New Testament, and if they couldn't, at least using the Septuagint, which we know the disciples used. No, they had their own tradition. Okay? So who knows which of the 5,800 manuscripts they used to get the Latin? Okay? And then from the Latin, they went back to the Greek. You talk about Bavel, and you talk about confusion. And we'll talk a little bit about this later in our discussion. The problem here is we know how to get the Greco-Roman stuff out of the scriptures, but the problem is that Yahusha did use a Septuagint. So we have to be careful here. In the process of fixing this, we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But more on that later. So when translating the New Testament, he referred to the third edition of Erasmus' anointed Latin Greek New Testament, the Greek being referred to as the received text or the Textus Receptus. In other words, this term received, Textus Receptus, was Tyndale saying that not that he used what Moses had, not that he used the Samaritan Torah, which Joshua wrote, okay, the oldest Torah in the world, the Shomronite Torah. Oh, no. Tyndale credits Erasmus, Latin, Greek. He received it from the Catholic Church, even though he claimed to be a Protestant reformer, so that the received text is known as the Textus Receptus or the majority text. What's interesting is there are manuscripts that are called the minority text that are not part of this conspiracy garbage crap going on here, okay? They are the Vaticanus, the Sinaiticus, and the Alexandrias. And these are called the minority texts, which line up more with the Torah, by the way, okay? But they're never used. Remember, I told you there were 5,800 Greek manuscripts. The ones that are not part of the received text or the Textus Receptus, isn't it interesting? Those are more in line with Torah and the Hebrew scriptures. And isn't it interesting? Those are the ones that are never used. So Tyndale says he based his wonderful translation on Erasmus and German and the Latin Vulgate. Some scholars speculate that Tyndale stayed away from using Wycliffe's Bible because he did not want his English to reflect Old English prior to the Renaissance. though independence from previous translations had not been established. The sources Tyndale used for the Torah are not known. This is the real Bible. I got the real Bible. We're not switching. Don't switch. You're a Roman Catholic. That's who you are. You came to Yahusha, and now you're being discipled by the Roman Catholics, claiming to be a Protestant or a child of the Reformation. Does that make you feel good? Does that make you feel positive about yourself? The sources Tyndale used for his translation are not known. Scholars believe Tyndale used the Hebrew Pentateuch or an edition from the Polyglot that may have referred to the Septuagint. If, maybe, may, nobody knows. He didn't translate. He kind of translated. It was 2 books. No, it was half the Old Testament. No, it was, we're not sure how much. Talk about Bavel. He started using more modern English that were subsequently used in the King James. How nice. Tyndale coined some phrases as well. Very nice. Such as blessed are the peacemakers. Very nice. He took it from German and composed modern English phrases like that. Very nice. Very nice. Very nice. Very nice. And, of course, none of this work was finished, so here comes Miles Cloverdale, who was an Anglican politician working for King James, and he finished up the job. Wonderful. And October 4th, 1535, the full, complete English Bible given from Mount Sinai, written by the finger of Satan, Yahuwah, allegedly, was printed. Now watch where it was printed. In Zurich, in Switzerland. Does anybody know what the language of Switzerland is? Yep, German. The Bible was the English Bible. Why was the English Bible translated in a place that spoke German? The Bible was translated by Miles Coverdale and Augustine Friar, another papist. There wasn't one person here that wore tzitzit. There wasn't one person here that kept Shabbos. There wasn't one person here that didn't eat pig. Are you enjoying your English translation? You're a smart guy. You're saving $90 because you don't want to spend $90 on the Restoration Scriptures. That would be a waste of money, right? Because you have the free version. You have the free version. Well, this is where the free version came from. We have ours online free too, because of all your complaining and lies about me. We put that online for free. But you're still complaining about me, aren't you? So you have to find something new to complain about, right? But what about Mr. Cloverdale, who was the last one on behalf of King James and whom King James relied on? Oh, he relied on one of his politicians. Cloverdale also used German and Latin for the translation to continue the messed up work of Tyndale. And then King James, okay, what does all this have to do with King James? I'll tell you what it has to do with King James. King James authorized it. Haven't you read the authorized 1611? He authorized, when it says authorized, what does it mean? He authorized Wycliffe. He authorized Tyndale. He authorized Cloverdale. He authorized Martin Luther. And these were all priests in the Roman Catholic Church to the day they died. The Roman Catholic Church threw them out, but they never threw the Roman Catholic Church out. They remained friars and bishops till the day they died. And the Geneva Bible, same thing. It was a collection of Roman Catholic priests who considered themselves to be reformers. Why? Because they were going to take the German and the Latin and bring them to farmers. You no longer had to be a king and a queen to read the scriptures in Latin. Now we were going to take the scriptures to the farmers and to the peasants. And so they're heroes. They're not heroes because they reformed a faith of the tree of the knowledge in good and evil. They're not reformers because they brought the people back to Torah. No, they're reformers because the Catholic Church threw them out, even though they never left the Catholic Church and died. So all of you who think, well, I don't read the Reims Douay scriptures, I'm a reformer, I keep Torah. You keep Torah, but the version you're using is promoted and written and was preserved from the German, from the Latin, from the Greek by the Roman Catholic Church, and that is how you are being discipled. That's why you're confused, and that's why you can't separate light from darkness, because you don't know the history of and the background of the modern English Bible. Now you do. Now you're without excuse. Panel, if you want to chip in here, and then I want to shift it a little bit to where does that leave us? In light of all this, where does that leave us? Mordecai or Yosh, chip in. A question, a comment. You want to sing, you can sing. I don't care what you do. As long as you don't mess up my round table and make it square.
No, I'm not a good carpenter to mess up a table like that. I had my own fair share of building tables, and that didn't work that well.
I know.
But
Don't let your wife near a table either.
I would just wanted to say that this whole thing makes me remember about the King Josiah revival
Mm.
of when it happened that the king of Judah basically said, "Go out there and get the Joshua Bible, because the one that we have here doesn't seem right. I mean, we just have pieces of it. We just have a little snippets of it. So it's interesting that these guys started with what seemed to be a good intention, but at the same time, they never changed anything that was worthwhile changing. Because yes, they made it more accessible to people, they made it more available to people, but at the same in the same token, they said, okay, the messed up things that we are doing now, you guys can do also. We can mess up together. Nobody ever bothered to say, okay, but the Romans were pagans until a few centuries ago. How did that happen that now we have the words of Mount Sinai if we were never there? This is what catches my attention, and because of the ignorance of the people and the ignorance that we have to this day, that nobody knows what are the origins of anything, nobody ever bothered checking.
The foundations of the English scriptures are faulty. If the basement is faulty, the whole house is faulty. The whole house of cards is collapsing and will collapse if someone ever wants truth and light. In other words, if people are not digging for light and truth like we are at the RSTNE project, then they're just going to believe that the foundations are strong. But those foundations were laid by the same church that promotes saints, that promotes worshiping of saints, that talks about the infallibility of the Pope as the Holy Father when we know Yahuwah is the Holy Father. So if you don't stop and challenge these things, you just accept it. It's like, if I turn on the faucet, I accept that there's water. If I open the refrigerator, I accept that it's cold. We just come to accept stuff without really finding out, is what we have correct, and is there an alternative to what we have? That's a big thing. See, remember, these guys had no alternative. They didn't have Hebrew parts of the Brit Hadashah like we have today. The Breslau manuscript, the St. Petersburg manuscript, the Hebrew Gospels that are in the Vatican. By the way, you know where they found the Hebrew Gospels in the Vatican? In a trash bin. They were literally in a trash bin. Somebody had trashed them, and they found them. They still have errors, but there's some. So in other words, they didn't have any access to the Hebrew of the Berchad of the New Testament, and they did have access to the medieval 900 AD Masoretic Hebrew, which itself had anti-Yahusha redactions and anti the name of Yahuwah redactions, but it was better than nothing. It was still better than the Latin and the Greek, Kurios, and Jesu Christu and all this stuff. But they didn't even use what they had. Because they had an agenda against the Jewish people and anything Hebraic, and and B, because they preferred the German and the Latin, which was the Catholic ordained and sanctioned. It was sanctioned by the Catholic Church, so they felt more comfortable with that. Not to mention the fact that their Hebrew is just like the Hebrew you find online today. Boker Tov, okay, but that's not speaking Hebrew. Shabbat Shalom, that's nice, but those are words. These guys, I don't believe these guys can translate entire sentences. So this is what we have today.
Yep, it's a comfort zone moment, because I understand that there is the historical context that peasants didn't have food, let alone the accessibility to knowledge to know that, yeah, Greece was not the first nation. But it's kind of a stretch to me that the Catholics to this day, and almost everybody here, almost everybody in the world, are reluctant to dig into the scriptures, where the scriptures themselves say that we are the letters there are older than Greece, are older than Rome, are older than Egypt, but still we tend to keep in the tradition, and we go back to the first episode, this fear of changing even though the facts are in front of our face. Greece was never there when Abraham received the first instructions. Rome was never there when Isaac was almost sacrificing Bereshit, Genesis 22. But we keep using the same things because they say, oh no, the Greek is the original language. Okay, but how is the Greek the original language if the Hellenists were not there when these things happened? How do we go from Moses, an Aramean dude that is from the house of Levi, to Greek being the original anything? And I was doing a teaching on Romans 3, and it kind of got my attention because Apostle Paul, Sholiach, he was a Pharisee before he got to his senses. So how are we supposed to believe that his letters were in Greek?
But the same way people don't change today, those guys who created the English Bible, they were also afraid of change, which is why they reverted to the Latin and the Greek, which was they were familiar with, instead of being real reformers and digging for everything Aramaic and Hebrew. If they had dug for the Aramaic, guess what? They would have found it.
Yep.
Guess what? They would have found it.
And it is anti-scriptural if you don't dig, because it says, don't fear who can destroy the body. We should fear the one who can destroy the spirit and the body. So when we dig for truth, that's the reward that we receive. We may be penalized by humans, we may be martyrs, but the goal is to find the purest form of the word we can actually and ever
If
find.
they really wanted to produce the accurate English translation for the first time, they could have said, okay, we're only going to use Semitic documents. They had access to the Peshitta. They had 380 manuscripts they could have found. They had access to it, and there was no contradiction. They said, no, thank you. They had the Septuagint, which we know for a fact Yahusha used because of the verses that match um, the prophecies in the Tanakh. And there's no question in my mind. There's absolutely no question. Not that Yahusha was promoting a Greek scriptures, not at all. But that was what was being used at the time of the diaspora. And I remind you that Yahusha was born when the Jews were already in diaspora. So he was using that. There's no question he was using that. So they could have relied only on the Septuagint for the Old Testament, the Tanakh, and on the Aramaic for the New. They chose not to because they were Catholics, and you have a Catholic Bible. Congratulations, everybody. And King James, he was the worst. He added stuff. Let me just tell you this, and then Mordecai, you feel free to ask a question or chip in. So right before this little period between Tyndale, Cloverdale, and then King James was in the 1500s, about 20 years before the King James Bible, was the Geneva Bible. Okay. First, it was known as the Matthew Bible, then it was known as the Geneva Bible. And these guys built on the false foundation of what we just talked about. But then King James said, in order for me to authorize a translation with the money and the backing of the king's court, there's a couple of things in here that are disrespectful. Let me explain what I mean. The Geneva Bible was a study Bible, like the RSTNE it was a study Bible. And in addition to being the faulty work of Tyndale, who did parts, Wycliffe, who did parts, nobody knows what part, most of it was German, even though they say, oh, we consulted the Hebrew, right? It's a difference between using the Hebrew and consulting, right? It's a difference. So in the side of the Geneva Bible, there were notes. If you get a copy of the original manuscripts of the Geneva Bible, that was about 20 years before King Jimmy, which would be about 1580, 1570, something like that, 1560. You have commentaries. Basically, the study notes were in the column. When King James saw the study notes, he goes, I can't promote this. If you want me to promote this to the masses, you've got to put allegiance to the throne. So he wanted to get rid of those study notes, and that's how the King James Bible was born. They already had the King James Bible. The Geneva Bible is the King James Bible. It's the Textus Receptus. The Geneva Bible is the Textus Receptus. But when King James saw those anti-throne, anti-monarchy notes, he said, no, 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 no. We need to produce a Bible that I can authorize without notes against the crown.
I
And
imagine just doing
that's your
so many
King James
crops.
Bible. That's your King. And by the way, King James added words like in Ephesians 6. He said, you know where it says we wrestle not against flesh and blood and principalities? It says, he added, we wrestle not against flesh and blood and thrones. In other words, leave my throne alone. Leave me in power. Don't mess with me or I'll kill you. So he added the word kings and thrones. Is this crazy, man? This is crazy stuff. But don't fool yourself. The King James Bible is the Geneva Bible, but King James wouldn't authorize it because he perceived comments in the study guide or the study part on the side as being anti-monarchy. So the King James was not to bring you the best Aramaic and to keep Torah and to keep kosher. No, it was there to establish the British monarchy as the ultimate authority in your life. But it's free online. You don't want to spend $90 and give it to scholars and researchers who are really restoring the scriptures and have no allegiance to the Protestant church or the Catholic church. Oh, no, keep your $90. Just keep using the free. Not everything that's free is free. It comes with a price. And that price is leaven, and that price is cyanide, and that price is strychnine.
It can become. Oh, I'm sorry.
I see you're doing some analyzing. So what's going on in that head over there?
Shalom, everyone.
Shalom,
Wow,
shalom.
this is good stuff, good stuff.
Man,
And
it's liberating stuff. Liberating.
wow, 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 wow. And Yoshiyahu said that Paul spoke Hebrew. Also, Yahusha spoke to Paul in the Hebrew language. Yahusha didn't come to Shaul and speaking Greek. You
Yep.
know, what I
That's a
wanted
good
to
point.
ask.
That's a very good point. That's right. When he arrested him on the Damascus road, he said he spoke in Hebrew. Why?
Mhm,
Why? That's
Was Jewish.
that's a good point.
mhm, mhm.
So you mean Yahusha wasn't using the Jerome's Latin Vulgate, or
No,
Yahusha wasn't using Erasmus's
no.
scriptures and said, Paul, let me get a hold of the Erasmus scriptures. You know what? They should change the name of Erasmus to Erasmus, like Error, Erasmus.
Yeah. So last night I had a kind of like heated debate with this gentleman. He's Jewish, but he professed to be a Christian. He goes to a Christian church. He talks like a Christian. So we were talking about Yohanan, John, the book of John, and I told him that it was written in Aramaic, that the word is milta. He says no, the word is nomos. And we know that nomos means not only, it doesn't mean the Torah of Yahuwah, but it means any kind of law. It could have been law of agriculture, traffic law, because I mean, there was traffic back in those days. It could be any law, but it doesn't refer exactly to the law of Moses or the Torah. So I was telling him that it was written in Aramaic, and it was called the Peshitta. He's a what I call a Hellenized Christian, because everything with him is Greek, 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 Greek.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to ask you,
One second. But in the Aramaic, what's the Aramaic word for Torah? Torah, right?
Laura.
Okay, but in the Greek, it's nomos. So how convenient, as you said, is it the city nomos? Is it the county nomos? Is it karate nomos? Like you said. See, but you don't have that problem in the Aramaic. Torah means Torah, just like it does in Hebrew.
Yeah.
They're sister languages, and the RSTNE uses a lot of Aramaic.
Mm.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, we also talk about Miksat Maseh Torah, because he was saying, oh, the works of the law. If you continue the works of the law, I say, wait a minute, what is works of the law to you? Oh, keeping Torah. I said, well, how you say works of the law in Hebrew? I was reading in the Dead Sea Scrolls. He's like, well, he didn't know, so I told him, Miksat Maseh Torah, and I explained it to him. But he continued. So my question to you is, if you could please share a little light on the book of John, the original book of John, uh, was written in Aramaic about Milta, and I'm going to take notes.
Yeah, I can do that briefly, but I want to
Yeah, briefly.
keep discussing stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, basically, there are different words for the word. Okay, definite article, the word. You have the Hebrew davar, which is obvious. You have the Aramaic memra, which is used in the Targumim. You have the main Targumim of Aramaic were used in the synagogues at the time of Yehusha. They are the Targum Onkelos and Targum Yehonatan, or Jonathan and Onkelos. One of them translated or paraphrased the Torah into Aramaic. The other paraphrased the rest of the Tanakh into Aramaic. And that was in use throughout Judea, except in the synagogues where the Hebrew was used for the liturgy. Then we come to the Greek, where the word is logos. Um, and then we have the unique word milta. When it's interesting you mentioned that, I want to show you on the screen um, the word milta in the Aramaic. And you'll see that it's a unique word because it implies neither male or female. It's gender neutral. And let me get this up on the screen here for you guys, and you'll see that we're not making this stuff up. Okay, so um, I'm going to screen share this, and everybody can see it. There it is. Okay, now it's very difficult to read for me as a Hebrew speaker the Aramaic letters. I can make out Aramaic words because they're sister languages. Okay, and this will lead us into the next episode, which is number 4. This is episode 3, but you can see right here. In the beginning was the Milta. It's not male or female. It's gender neutral. Logos, okay, is has gender. Davar is gender, female, but Yahuwah chose a word to describe Yahusha as Almighty Yahuwah. There's no Savior but me, Isaiah 43:11. So in the beginning was the Milta. Watch this. And he, the Milta, was with Aloha, and Aloha himself was the Milta. So not just the Milta became flesh. Yeah, Aloha himself was the Milta. And maybe we can talk about this Aloha Allah stuff in the next episode. But you see here, this one, the Milta, was existing in the beginning with Aloha.
You're sharing your screen, sir?
Oh, I didn't. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't put it up
Yeah,
there.
no, because it's not up there.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Now you see it, right?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So I'm not going to go over the whole thing, but you see it here. In the beginning, there was Milta. Let me make it bigger.
Just scroll up a little bit because we are seeing just verse 2.
Yeah. Better?
No, we are seeing just verse 2, like a
I can
frozen
fix
image.
I can fix it. There you go. Okay?
Still just verse 2.
Yeah, I know. I'm gonna. Oh, so you're not seeing the very top.
No, we are seeing just from verse 2 and under. Now we see it. Okay, now we see it.
Okay, so rather than take time, you see it right there. In the beginning was Milta, the Word, and the Milta, and he, the Milta, was with Aloha, and Aloha himself was the Milta. See? And then you see the similarity to Hebrew. The Chaim, the Chai, existed in him. The Chai, not Chaim, but Chai. See, it's very similar. This is the Nura. In Hebrew, it's Or, right? Or, the Or of the Olam. Here, it's like Or. See? Ora, Nura. See, you see how similar it is? But the bottom line is that here's your Milta. So we believe this more than likely is the original. And to get back to what Mordecai was saying, brother, my experience is that people that are seeking for truth will not debate; they will receive.
Yep.
Once you get into a debate, the word says that you're talking to someone who is a disputer of this world system. The scripture says they are a disputer of this world system. They're not when you and I were hungering and thirsting after righteousness, were we debating with Yahuwah? No. Were we debating with his shlichim? No. When you walked into Miami all those years ago, you weren't there to debate with me. You were there to learn, right? So as soon as someone starts debating you on the internet, you don't have a student.
No, this was at the karate school because he goes there and practice. So then, but I told my daughter was there, and I said, "Look, I'm sorry I even argued with this gentleman. I'm not going to argue with him anymore because I told him because I quoted Ezekiel 36 verse 27. I said to him, look, I'm here trying to bring you the Torah, and I can't do that because you can only come to Torah if the Ruach HaKodesh brings you the Torah, because this is what Ezekiel 36:27 says, that the Holy Spirit will cause you to keep his ordinances, his commandments, and his Torah.
Which
So,
doesn't mean you don't have the Ruach Hakodesh. It means you may have it, but it's such a small quantity. Because remember, the
well,
different
the
the
scripture
different
says, not grieve the Holy Spirit. That's how you grieve
right,
the
right,
Holy
right,
Spirit, by not keeping Torah.
right. But remember what Yahusha said? He said, I'm sorry, the scriptures. To him was given the Ruach without measure. So
Mhm.
a person who's not keeping the Torah, even though, like you said, Ezekiel 36 says, when I put my Ruach inside of you, they will keep the Torah. One of two conclusions. They don't have the Ruach, or they do, as a possibility, but in such small quantities that they need a lot more before their eyes are open. See what I'm saying? The either possibility. Either possibility. But yeah, but honestly, I started out that way. When I first got saved, I was a member of the Woodhaven Baptist Church in Queens, and I began to realize that this was not the full counsel of Yahuwah, and I wasn't satisfied, and I was hungering and thirsting. So, if other than debate, right? If this man or any person is seeking, Yahuwah will reward that. He will reward that, but they're gonna have to lay aside that spirit of the age, which is to debate, right? You,
Mm.
you even see
Yeah.
the world can't get that right when they say, okay, there's going to be a presidential debate, right? Then they get up on stage. They're not debating, they're shouting at each other. One person makes a point, the other person doesn't address the point. Then another candidate makes a point, they don't address the point, they just shout a different opinion that has nothing to do with the point. So they're not really debating. Most people, in order to debate, you have to listen and then you have to address the point, not change the subject. Most of these debates, if you notice, when you answer their question, then they change the subject.
All the time. Yes, that happened last night so many times. I asked him, I say, is the Torah spiritual? No, Torah is not spiritual. And I say, okay, will you please read Romans 7:14? And he read it. Then as soon as he read it, and it says that the Torah is spiritual, then he said, no, I didn't say that it wasn't spiritual. And then it was just crazy. And
Yeah.
everybody that was here, that was there, so, and then he changed the subject, like you say.
Debate is not the art of
No,
change, it's the art of being right That's all it is. People wanting to be right over the
Yeah.
other person.
Well, how many people are right today because they believe that the King James Bible, they don't know anything about Tyndale, they don't know anything about Wycliffe, they don't know anything about Cloverdale, they don't know anything about the homosexual married. Maybe she started murdering person because she was looking for a real man, right? Her husband was a homosexual. These people are whacked, man. They lived and died as Roman Catholics. If you asked 1,000 people on Facebook, they would tell you, oh no, they were Protestant reformers. They didn't reform anything to the left of Matthew, and they didn't reform anything that had the word Hebrew associated to it. I'm a reformer. Mordecai is a reformer. These people are not reformers.
Yep. Can I say something?
Go ahead, man. It's a
Um,
round table.
we
Don't make
were
my table square. I'm gonna come up with a new song. Don't make my table like Elvis voice, like don't make my table square. All right, go ahead.
two things that we were talking and tackling in in the second episode, and here also, that the reason behind things. And as you said, you were pointing out the whole history of the English Bible specifically, because we know there are, the Bible is in every language nowadays, but the origins tend to be the same. But in Jeremiah 51, we have a very strong warning to keep in the traditions, specifically of the Catholic Church. In verse 45, it says, "Come out of her, my people." And we see in context that we are
Mhm.
talking about the Anglican or the Catholic Church, and the whole basis of the English scriptures are Catholic. So how are we supposed to be his disciples if we are neglecting one of the biggest instructions or orders that we have, to come out of something that offends him and puts all of his things in jeopardy? So we are supposed to come out of her, of who, of whom? Uh, we are supposed to get out from the Catholic Church, their traditions, and everything that is antinomian, that they project forward, that they promote. And how do we do this? We basically try to get and dig for versions that try to preserve to the best of their capabilities the right things, the right traditions, the right origins, as we are trying to do in the RSTNE. I say we because you are doing the whole thing, but I help you with some of the stuff. But basically, with the RSTNE, the Restoration Scriptures to Name Edition, we are trying to come out of her, because pretty much all the scriptures up to this point were based on political traditions, political agenda, and also pagan foundations, because they didn't bother checking the originals. And
The more
also,
the more we come out, the more we realize we have to come out. That's the problem.
yep,
See, people have a deception. Okay, I'm keeping Torah, I'm keeping Shabbat, I came out of her, my people. No, you didn't. The more we come out, and I'm going to show you this later, maybe in the next episode. The more we come out, the more we realize, no, there's more to come out from.
yep,
These people look at, I've come out of Babylon, I'm no longer in the church, as a congratulations one-time event.
yep. It had nothing to do with like one-time events. Yeah, our walk is continuous, it's constant. And as much as you get out of her, like I wasn't a church member before I got saved. I was a full-fledged pagan, so I didn't know all of these stuff about the church, and everything that the church preaches wrong, and everything that the Catholics did. I couldn't care less about them. But it is visible that no matter how far we go, no matter how deep we dig, we find the Catholic Church in our scriptures that we consider to be completely set apart.
Yep.
But Yahuwah, that doesn't
Yeah,
mean
but
that
even though
Yahuwah
you
didn't
were a
preserve
pagan,
his
man,
word.
even though you were a pagan, those video games that you were playing as a pagan, sitting in your room depressed and suicidal, guess what, man? Even that was influenced by the Vatican.
Yeah, pretty much.
You thought you were just, oh, I had nothing to do with religion. Yeah, but religion had something to do with you.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean that Yahuwah didn't preserve his word. No, he did. He is flawless. His word is here forever. But the thing is, people are trying to dissuade them for their own purposes, and they don't care about salvation. They don't care about people's souls. They just care about political agendas, as we saw with Revelation 1:6, with the Anglican Church,
Yeah.
with all the revivals, all the House of Windsor. That our scriptures are untouched because we have the original. But No, Israel is not in Greece. How are we
Original.
supposed to work with the Greek language if our language is supposed to be Hebrew? And also, Yahusha said to the Pharisees in Matthew 15 when they were talking about, oh, why don't your disciples wash their hands before eating? In other words, why are you not following tradition? That seems to be socially wrong. But in Jeremiah 51, it says, come out of her, my people. Her traditions count as well. It's not about, oh, I don't eat pig anymore. Okay, cool. You're supposed to do that. It is an obligation. We were talking about uh, going the extra mile to come out of her. And that means everything that is linked to her. I'm not saying that the RSTNE is a perfect work that is flawless. No, we are updating as Yahuwah gives us revelation and
We're
the
not
Ruach utters.
we're not
But
perfect, but we're light years ahead of that stuff.
yeah, but we are trying. That's the thing. We are trying. The revelations are being received and analyzed. We are not just putting it there because somebody woke up a Thursday morning and said, okay, let me change that. No, it is, we have the chain of the manuscripts. We can confirm them. We try to check the date as much as possible to see if it's valid. We cross it, we co-reference to the Torah to see if it's actually valuable. So for those of you that are reluctant or hesitant about buying the RSTNE, you are basically contradicting scripture to a certain
You're
extent.
stuck where you are, man.
You're stuck and also contradicting scripture to a certain extent because Jeremiah says, get out of there. Try as much as you can to get out of the Catholic
But what
traditions
they don't
because,
understand is that it's a never-ending process.
yeah.
There's so much to get out of. We'll cover some of that. Two points, and then Mordecai, you can jump in, and then we have to finish this episode. Number one, we who are doing this work in the RSTNE, okay, we have no fear of change because Yahuwah is the same, but the change that we are changing is the work of Erasmus. The change that we are changing is the work of Wycliffe. It is not the work of Yahuwah. We are not changed. We don't have fear because we are not attempting by any means to change the words and the work of Yahuwah. We have no fear because we realize the changes are necessary to get back to the word of Yahuwah. That's a big difference between us and the church fathers. The church fathers were afraid to change to the Hebrew and to the Aramaic, right? They're the ones who are afraid to change, and that's the Bible everybody has now. People who were living in fear of changing, really changing. They got thrown out of the Catholic Church and they still died Catholics. What does that tell you? We don't have that fear because we're not changing Yahuwah's word. We're changing popery and papacy masks that are parading as Reformed Protestant Bibles. Number one. Number two, and we'll carry this over to the next episode. We have to be careful here at the RSTNE project with the Greek because, to be honest, we have the Dead Sea Scrolls and we have the it scroll in India and all these things that these folks didn't have. So we have to admit that they did not have access to it, but they were not hungering and thirsting after it either. Because I believe if they were hungering and thirsting after it, Yahweh would have given it. I believe He would have given it to them hundreds of years before He allowed it to be found. But we have to be careful with the Greek because, on one hand, the Greek is an open door for the pantheon of polytheistic gods, right? On the other hand, if we throw out the Greek, we deny what Yahusha that he used the Septuagint, which matches with the Tanakh, as opposed to the Masoretic text, which doesn't match with the Tanakh because the rabbis made sure it wouldn't match. So we got to be careful about this. We can carry this into the next episode. We want to throw out the Greek. We want to throw out the Greek. But if we're not careful, the Septuagint is the only, in my view, legitimate Greek document that the Masoretes didn't mess with because 70 Hebrew scholars, not Erasmus, not Wycliffe, not Tyndale, 70 Hebrew scholars commissioned from Jerusalem translated the Hebrew from the Greek. So there is a Greek, not one of the 5,800 manuscripts of the New Testament. There is a Greek we cannot get rid of. We got to be very careful here. because I've heard people who are doing their own translation now, new guys, okay, new translations, and they're saying we're Greeking it out. We're Greeking it out. We got to get rid of everything Greek. I agree with the premise, but what are we Greeking out? Are we Greeking out the 5,800 variants of the New Testament, or does that include the Septuagint? See, we'll talk about this a little bit later. There was never a problem with the Septuagint, but if you're going to go radical and you're going to Greek everything out, now you got a problem, because you're left with the Hebrew Old Testament, and the only one we have is the one doctored by the rabbis in the Middle Ages that was compiled from 700 to 900 AD over a period of 200 years. So if you just throw out the Septuagint because it is Greek, because you want to come out of her, my people, now you basically have to rely on the anti-Yahusha redactions of the rabbis and the vowel pointing to mistranslate and mispronounce words. So we have to be careful here. I would amend it like this. We got to get rid of all the Greek as long as we have the Aramaic and the Hebrew in the New Testament. We must preserve the Septuagint because that's the only one that's not been anti-Yahusha doctored. So we can't really get rid of the Greek. We can get rid of the New Testament Greek, which is what they used. We can't get rid of the Septuagint because that's more reliable because the rabbis didn't mess with that. Mordechai, any closing thoughts? And then we'll pick it up in the next
I have a question. I don't know if it takes too long to answer, so maybe.
Yeah, let's start the next episode. Let's start the next episode with your question. How's that?
Yep, that'll be good.
All right, guys. We'll see you next week.
All right. See you next week.
Shalom from the RSTNE Roundtable.
Welcome to the RSTNE Roundtable podcast, a discussion that focuses in the gold standard of the word of Yahuwah. Here are your three hosts, Sholiach Moshe, leader Yoshiyahu, and leader Mordecai.